It's fair to say that so far, the 2021 and 22 NBA season, only about a week into the season, has been pretty interesting, and there's a lot of interesting narratives going on here. And my last video I made before my week and a half long break was talking about how interesting the season could be for multiple different reasons, and something that I didn't even touch on was how there was some rule changes going into this NBA season about fouls, and how when an offensive player initiates contact now, there will be no fouls called, and officials are not rewarding flopping as nearly as much as they did in years prior. And a few months ago, during the midst of the last NBA season, I made an entire video pretty much ranting about how bad the officiating had been, and pretty much my two main things that I talked about in this video, along with some other things, were how the lean-in fouls need to stop being called, and how the refs need to stop rewarding flopping. And pretty much both of these problems, the NBA and the NBA officials have solved pretty well, and I'm very impressed by this. The fact that NBA refs are now doing this is making the game much more enjoyable to watch, but at the same time we are seeing players having trouble adjusting to the way that the NBA in this season is officiated different than it was last season, and that's going to be the focus of today's video. And what I'm going to be talking about today is 5 main players that have been affected so far in the first 4 or 5 games of the season with these rule changes and how they're having trouble adjusting. I mean, pretty much all of these players are spectacular players in the league right now, and I think all of them, in my opinion, are near top 15 players in the game right now, but they definitely are having trouble adjusting. I'm sure they will as the season goes on, but so far these are the 5 players that are being affected the most by these new rule changes in the league. So let's get into who those players are and how they've been doing so far in this young season. So obviously the first player we gotta talk about here is James Harden, and like I said at the start, pretty much all of these players have only played 5, or in one case only 4 games in the season, so obviously he's extremely early and most of these players will adjust. But in terms of the first 5 games, James Harden has been struggling more than really we've ever seen him struggle throughout his career, and it's pretty obvious when you watch him play that this is because of the new rules, and how this is affecting him is pretty obvious. And we look at what Harden's been doing this season, scoring wise only putting up 16.6 points per game, which is obviously extremely low compared to what he was doing a couple years ago, especially with the Houston Rockets, and even last year still putting up almost 25 points per game with the Brooklyn Nets, pretty much as the second option on that team. And this year Harden is only shooting 36% from the field so far, which is obviously very low, and only a 49% true shooting, which is almost about 8% below the league average from last season. And when we look at how often he's getting into the line compared to last year, again, it's only 5 games, but Harden is shooting an extremely low 3 free throw attempts per game, which is really insane to think about when we think about James Harden, who usually gets to the line so often, as last year he nearly got to the line 7.5 times per game, and the year before that he had almost 12 free throw attempts per game. And that has pretty much been cut in half now twice when it comes to this season. And like I said, Harden will adjust to this, but as a guy who is extremely invested in watching NBA this season, I mean, pretty much every day of the NBA season so far, I've been watching about 2 to 3 games per day, and 2 of these have been Nets games. And when you watch James Harden play, you can tell that he is kind of getting smarter as a player and a better playmaker as he was last year. But scoring wise, not only does he not have that talent anymore of being able to put up 30-40 points per game on a consistent basis, but you can see he's legitimately struggling out there and kind of lost because he's not getting those foul calls that he's used to having. And like I said, he will be adjusting through this throughout the season, but Harden is off to a very slow start right now, and we have to look at the new foul rules as a big reason as to why he is struggling. The next player I want to discuss here, who's gotten off to a slow start this season for a top 10 player in the game, is Joel Embiid. And Joel isn't even relying that much on the lean-in foul tactic like a guy like Harden did and some of the other guys I'll be discussing throughout this video, but it's no secret that Joel Embiid definitely flopped a lot, and he's trying to still, but it's just simply not working because the refs are not giving those fouls anymore to the superstar players in this game, and they're being a lot more strict when it comes to flopping, and I absolutely applaud them for this. And Embiid's struggling a little bit because of this. He's also struggling definitely a lot because teams are guarding him in a different way, where they're double teaming him a lot more and pretty much exposing his lack of playmaking skills and playmaking ability, to the point where Embiid is definitely struggling a lot so far this season. And I think he will adjust to that and the new foul rules as well. But when we look at what he's doing so far in the first 5 games of the season, only putting up 21.5 points per game, when last year he led the entire league in points per 75 possessions, and in terms of points per game last year averaged 28.5 for the entirety of last season. And also this year, Embiid's efficiency so far has been way down, only shooting about 44% from the field, 58% true shooting, which last year was around league average, but for a dominant big man in the post like Embiid, this is definitely lower than usual. And when we talk about his free throw attempts, only shooting 8.8 free throw attempts per game this season, which is definitely higher than a lot of these players I'm discussing today. But last year he shot almost 11 free throw attempts per game, so that's definitely lowered a little bit too. Again, another player that's going to adjust to the way that defenses are playing him this season and the new foul rules, but so far Embiid is struggling with the fact that he can't just flop to get easy calls anymore. Another player I wanted to briefly mention here is Luka Doncic, and when you initially look at Luka's basic stats, he definitely is certainly still doing Luka things, and he definitely still looks like an incredible MVP caliber player out there on the court. Still this season averaging 24 points per game, 9.3 rebounds per game, and about 8 assists per game, nearly averaging a triple-double through the first 4 games of the season. But his efficiency definitely is down a little bit, shooting only 44.7% from the field, only 52% true shooting, which is certainly very low for Luka, and he's definitely turning the ball over way more than he ever has in his career, averaging almost 5.5 turnovers per game this season. And as a guy that has Luka as my main player on my fantasy team, that's pretty annoying. And when we look at his free throw numbers, only shooting 4.3 free throw attempts per game this season compared to last year, where he shot over 7 free throw attempts per game, and in 2019 and 2020 he shot 9.2 free throw attempts per game. So you can see that his ability to not be able to lean in anymore to initiate contact and get to the line is affecting him, just like the other players I mentioned. And so far, again, it's a very small sample size, but so far in the first 4 games of the season, Luka doesn't exactly look as comfortable as he did in previous years, just because of how he's not able to get to the line nearly as easy as it was in prior years. Now, going into this season, the player that I thought would be affected the most by these new rule changes is Trae Young. I mean, last year, most of the time when he came off of a screen and was able to get slightly ahead of that guard that was defending him, he would literally just lean right back into them, and the refs would constantly call this foul. And a lot of fans around the NBA, including myself, were starting to say that Trae Young was straight up ruining basketball with this new move that he had made. Now, obviously, this has been fixed this season, which is very fortunate for us NBA fans, and Trae Young is still definitely a very fun player to watch. And when we look at his scoring stats this season and what he's doing on the court when it comes to scoring, it really hasn't been affected that much, still putting up about 24.2 points per game, shooting nearly 45% from the field and nearly 54% true shooting, which when we compare that to what he did in the regular season last year, it still is relatively similar. It's a little bit down from last year so far in the first 5 games in the season, but honestly, Trae has not been affected by this as much as I thought. And when we do watch him play, he still definitely is showing that he's one of the best playmakers in the game, leading the league in box creation this year so far, just like he did last season. And he's still a very effective overall player at the top of the key when he gets into that pick and roll with either John Collins or Clint Capella, when he creates his own shot off the dribble and can get open and shoot a 3, and when he's driving towards the rim and shooting that little floater. So Trae Young still looks pretty good overall, but when we look at the frequency that he's getting to the line, compared to last year, it's pretty much cut in half. This year shooting so far 4.4 free throw attempts per game, when last year he was shooting 8.7 free throw attempts per game. So you can definitely see that even though his overall game isn't being affected that much, he's absolutely not getting to the line as much, and he's not able to get away with those cheap lean lean-in fouls anymore that we saw last season. And then the last player I wanted to discuss here who really surprised me a little bit that he's getting affected by these new rules, it's Devin Booker. And Booker almost always came across to me as a guy who didn't really take advantage of the lean-in fouls and the flopping that much. But now looking back at it, he did flop quite a little bit, especially during that playoff run with the Phoenix Suns last year, especially in the mid-range area, sometimes coming off of a screen, taking a shot, maybe leaning in a couple times or two, and kind of flopping around the rim a few times, and the new rules have affected him a little bit too. He doesn't really look quite as comfortable on the court as he usually does, and isn't dominating nearly as much, especially as he did last season. Only putting up so far 21.5 points per game, on only 40.7% from the field and less than 50% true shooting for Devin Booker. And when we talk about his free throw attempts, only shooting 3.5 free throw attempts per game so far this season, when last year he shot about 6 per game, and the year prior he shot about 7.3 per game. So another player here that's being affected a little bit by this. And overall, all of these players, like I said, are absolutely superstar caliber players in the league right now, and all of these players will adjust because that's what they do. They're incredible players in this league that have such amazing talent on the offensive side of the floor when it comes to scoring the basketball, getting to the rim, and getting fouled, and they will adjust, like I said. I just wanted to point out how it's affecting these players early on, and just how good of a job the NBA has done changing these rules and really doing what's right. This year so far in general, in the average game there are exactly 20 free throw attempts per game, and this is the lowest in all of NBA history. And obviously back then there were definitely a lot more free throw attempts per game because there were more shooting fouls being called instead of fouls on the floor, and over time free throw attempts have gone down, but they are definitely especially low this season because of the new rule changes. And overall the league true shooting has dropped as well so far this season, as this year the league true shooting, or the league average true shooting, is 54.8%, whereas last year it was 57.2%. And for the entire league, that is a pretty big drop off there. But even though players are scoring a little bit less efficiently and a little bit less overall, and getting to the line a little bit less, it's still making the game much more entertaining and enjoyable to watch, since it's not constantly being paused for cheap fouls and cheap free throws being taken. So NBA, and especially the NBA refs, I thank you for changing these rules and taking action to make it better and more enjoyable for us fans to watch. So that's going to conclude today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Comment down below your thoughts on the NBA new rule changes and how these players are being affected, and if you think they're going to bounce back later in the season or not. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next video.